The night she rode into Bitter Creek, the wind howled like it knew her name. Snow cut sideways across the street, lanterns swung and groaned, and every man pulled his coat tighter. The girl sat stiff in the saddle, too thin for the cold, hair dark and loose, eyes fixed ahead like she had already seen worse than this. Folks would later swear the air went colder when she passed, that the horses shied and the dogs went quiet, and someone muttered the word cursed before the saloon doors even closed behind her. Christmas Eve or not, Bitter Creek was a place that feared what it did not understand. Eli Mercer watched from the hitching rail, tall and broad-shouldered, beard rimed with frost, hands scarred from rope and rail. He had come to town for flour and coffee, maybe a bit of molasses if the store still had some. The ranch was quiet this winter, too quiet since the fever took his brother and sister-in-law the spring before, leaving him with 2 children and a house that echoed at night. When he saw the girl sway in the saddle, he stepped forward without thinking, caught the reins, and asked if she needed help. Her voice came soft but steady. She said just a room and a fire if the town allowed it, and that was when the whispers started to crawl. They said she brought sickness wherever she went, that her last family died in a barn fire, that a train derailed the week she boarded it. Lies grow easy in a hard winter. The storekeeper shook his head. The boarding house woman crossed herself, and the sheriff shifted his weight like he wished she would leave. Snow gathered on her shoulders as she sat there, pride keeping her upright, fear tucked deep behind her eyes. Eli felt something twist in his chest, the same feeling he got when his niece cried in her sleep. He cleared his throat and said she could come to his place for the night. Just the night, he said, until the storm passed. Silence fell thick as the snow. The girl looked at him like she was measuring the truth of him. Finally she nodded once, slid from the saddle, and nearly fell. Eli caught her elbow, felt how light she was, felt the tremor she tried to hide. Someone laughed nervously, someone else spat, and the word cursed came again, louder this time. Eli turned slow and calm, eyes hard as winter stone, and said no one was cursed for wanting warmth on Christmas Eve. Not on his watch. He swung up onto his horse, lifted her onto the saddle behind him, and rode out while the town stared. The ride back to the ranch cut through drifts and moonlight. The girl held the saddle horn with numb fingers. Eli felt her lean against his back when the wind hit hardest. He asked her name. She said, Lila, just Lila, nothing more. He told her about the children, about how the house might be loud in the morning but it would be warm tonight. She listened like each word mattered. When they reached the house, the windows glowed amber, smoke curled from the chimney, and for the first time that night her shoulders eased. Inside, the children froze when they saw her, boots half unlaced, eyes wide. Eli introduced her as a guest, nothing more. He set her by the fire, poured soup, wrapped her in a spare blanket. Lila's hands shook as she ate, but color slowly crept back into her face. The kids watched, curious and cautious. Eli watched too, noticing how she smiled at them like she was afraid to scare them away, noticing the old sadness in her eyes. Later, when the children slept, Lila told him bits of her story. Orphaned young, passed from place to place, blamed when things went wrong. She did not ask for pity. She only asked not to be sent back into the storm. Outside, the wind rose again, rattling the shutters. Eli stared into the fire and thought of the empty beds upstairs, thought of promises made and broken. He remembered how folks once whispered about his family too, about bad luck and fever, how it felt to be marked by loss. He looked at Lila and said she could stay through Christmas. At least, her breath caught. She nodded and whispered thank you like it was a prayer. Somewhere deep inside him, a decision settled, quiet but firm. Whatever name the town put on her, it would not rule his house. Before dawn the storm broke hard, snow piling high. Bitter Creek, cut off from the world. Eli stood at the window, coffee warming his hands, and knew when the town came looking, and they would, he would not send her away. The fire crackled, the house breathed with life again, and for the first time since the fever year, Eli Mercer felt something like hope. Out in the dark, the world might call her cursed, but under his roof, on this Christmas Eve, she was family. Morning came slow and white, the world buried under fresh snow. Eli hitched the barn doors open before sunrise, breath smoking, boots crunching, the cattle load uneasy. Winter always made them restless. Lila watched from the porch wrapped in Eli's spare coat, sleeves too long for her arms. She offered to help and he nodded, handed her grain. The children followed like shadows, and for a while it felt almost ordinary, laughter cutting the cold. But Bitter Creek was not a town that forgot, and word travels even when roads are buried. By midday the sheriff's men were already riding out, slow and cautious, stopping at every ranch along the way. In town the stories had grown sharper overnight. Someone swore a cow calved dead the hour after Lila passed through. Another said their stove cracked for no reason at all. Fear always needs a face, and hers was easy to name. Eli sensed it before he saw them, a tightness in the air, horses snorting. The children went quiet. Lila stood still, eyes fixed on the far fence line, like she had lived this moment too many times. The sheriff arrived with 2 men, snow crusted on their coats, hats pulled low. He asked polite questions that held sharp edges. Who was the girl? Where did she come from? How long was she staying? Eli answered plain and steady, said she was his guest until the storm broke. Nothing more, nothing less. The sheriff glanced at Lila, then at the children, and shifted his stance. Towns survive on keeping peace, but peace built on fear never lasts. He warned Eli folks were uneasy, that trouble followed her. Eli met his gaze and said trouble followed winters like this too. Yet no one blamed the snow. After they rode off, the ranch felt smaller, walls closer. Lila apologized, voice thin, said she would leave once the roads cleared. She always did. Eli surprised himself by answering sharp, saying no one was forcing her. Not here, not now. The children clung to her coat, already choosing sides without knowing it. That night the wind returned, rattling the eaves. Lila sat by the fire sewing a tear in Eli's shirt, careful and quiet, like she was trying not to take up space. Eli watched her hands, steady despite everything, and wondered how much running a person could survive. The next day brought more signs, or so folks claimed. A fence rail split, a horse threw a shoe, a man slipped on ice and broke his wrist. Each small misfortune laid at her feet. By evening a group rode out, not the law this time, just townsfolk with tight mouths and cold eyes. They stopped short of the yard, calling Eli's name, demanding he send her out. The children cried. Lila stepped forward on her own, chin lifted, saying she would go, that she was used to it. Eli's voice cut across the yard like a whip crack, saying no, saying anyone wanting her would have to answer to him. A long moment stretched, breath freezing in the air. Someone muttered about Christmas, about mercy, another about curses. Fear fought with shame. Finally they turned back, not defeated, just delayed. Eli knew that look. Storms don't always break right away. Later, by lamplight, Lila told him more of her past. A mother gone young, a stepfather cruel. Homes where accidents followed because poverty and neglect breed accidents, not curses. But she had learned long ago it was easier for people to believe she was the problem. Eli listened, anger and sorrow mixing. He said softly that no child chooses the sins of the world. Christmas Eve settled in heavy and quiet, snow thick as wool. The children hung scraps of ribbon on the tree Eli had cut. Lila baked bread with the last of the flour. The smell filled the house. Warm and alive, she sang under her breath, a tune worn smooth with memory. Eli felt the house knit itself together, like broken boards mended. Yet even in the warmth, he stayed alert, rifle cleaned and set by the door, not for her, but for what fear can turn people into. Near midnight, a shout cut through the wind, then another, the sound of hooves too many for comfort. Eli rose, heart steady but heavy. He kissed the children's heads, told Lila to stay back. She shook her head, stepping beside him instead. Lantern light flared as figures gathered at the fence, anger, louder than reason now. The sheriff's voice was not among them. Eli squared his shoulders, knowing whatever came next would decide more than one winter night. Inside, the fire burned bright. Outside, Bitter Creek gathered its courage, and Lila stood at his side. No longer running, no longer alone. The crowd pressed closer to the fence, faces half hidden by scarves and shadow, lantern light shaking in the wind. Someone shouted that enough was enough, that sickness and bad luck followed her trail. That Christmas or not, the town had to protect itself. Eli stepped forward slow and solid, boots sinking in the snow, rifle still resting by the door behind him. His hands open, his voice calm but carrying. He said this was his land and his house, that no harm had come from the girl, only from winter and hard living. Words bounced off fear like hail off iron. Lila stood beside him, spine straight, heart pounding, ready to leave if it meant sparing the children. Then a sound cut through the shouting, a child's cough, sharp and wet. followed by another. The sheriff's horse pushed through the line, breath steaming. The man himself rode up hard, anger flashing in his eyes. He told them to stand down, that the sickness they feared was already in town, not riding behind a thin girl, but spreading from house to house. Fever had broken out overnight, real and deadly. Panic rippled through the crowd, the curse they hunted suddenly wearing a new face. The sheriff said doctors were riding from the railhead, but roads were slow. People looked from him to Lila, doubt cracking the story they had told themselves. One woman stepped forward, voice trembling, said her boy was burning up, that she had cursed the girl that morning, tears cutting tracks through frost on her cheeks. Lila moved before Eli could stop her, stepping into the yard, saying she would help. She had tended sickness before. She knew how to cool a fever and keep someone breathing through the night. The crowd fell back, fear wrestling with need. Eli felt his chest tighten. This was the moment people like her were lost, given too much and protected too little. He put a hand on her shoulder and said they would go together. They rode through the storm from house to house, lanterns swinging, snow biting, Eli breaking doors when needed. Lila, working quiet and steady, soaking cloths, whispering comfort, never once flinching when someone pulled back in fear. The children waited at the ranch with the sheriff. The night stretched long and brutal. More than one life balanced on the edge. By dawn the fever slowed, not gone but beaten back enough to hope. Exhaustion dragged at Lila's steps. Eli lifted her once when she stumbled, carried her through a drift like she weighed nothing at all. Christmas morning came pale and still, the storm spent at last. Smoke rising from chimneys like prayers, word spread fast. The girls stayed through the night. The girls saved lives. Curses lose their grip when daylight names the truth. Folks came to the ranch not with torches but with bread and coffee, eyes downcast, voices soft. The woman whose boy had burned with fever brought a knitted scarf, pressed it into Lila's hands, whispered forgiveness. Lila accepted it with a nod. Grace learned the hard way. Inside the house the children rushed her, laughter breaking free. Eli watched from the doorway, something warm and fierce settling in his chest. The sheriff pulled him aside, said quietly the town owed them both, said there would be no more riding her out. Not now, not ever. Eli nodded, knowing promises matter only when kept. Later, he found Lila by the tree, small gifts laid out, a carved horse, a ribbon, bread still warm. She said she had never stayed anywhere this long, never woken to Christmas without dread. Eli told her she could stay longer still. They sat at the table as snow melt dripped from the eaves, sunlight catching dust in the air. Lila spoke of leaving habits hard to break, of waiting for the moment kindness turns. Eli spoke of family not made by blood alone, of choosing and being chosen. The children listened, understanding more than anyone guessed. Eli said the words plain and true, said she was family if she wished it. The room went quiet. Lila's breath caught, years of running pressing back. Then she smiled, small and real, and said she did. By afternoon Bitter Creek rang with new sounds, hammers mending fences, laughter carrying, the fever fading into memory, folks no longer whispering cursed but calling her by name. Eli stood on the porch as Lila hung the new scarf around her neck, wind gentle now, the hard winter still ahead, but faced together. Christmas had come and gone, leaving behind something stronger than fear. The town might forget many things, but on that Christmas Eve and morning, they learned the difference between a curse and a family, and so did she.